William Slim. William Slim was one of the most effective yet long underappreciated Allied commanders of World War II, a general whose leadership transformed the demoralized, forgotten army into a victorious force in Burma. A British officer with experience in World War I and colonial campaigns, Slim took command of the British 14th Army in Burma, at a time when Allied forces were retreating, exhausted, and demoralized, facing a highly capable Japanese army skilled in jungle warfare. Slim focused on mutual respect and even got a nickname, Uncle Bill, for his strong care for his soldiers. Slim emphasized realistic training, physical conditioning, and adaptation to jungle combat rather than clinging to European methods that had repeatedly failed. He reorganized supply systems around air transport and moved hospitals closer to the front to reduce the suffering of injured soldiers. During the defensive battles of Imphal and Kohima in 1944, Slim's forces absorbed and then reversed Japan's major offensive into India. His strategy relied on defensive resilience, coordinated artillery and air power, and the deliberate exhaustion of overextended Japanese formations. Once the momentum shifted, Slim conducted a relentless counteroffensive, retaking central Burma through maneuver, deception, and sustained pressure. His command style rebuilt confidence in an army previously defined by retreat. Erich von Manstein. Erich von Manstein was a German commander so influential that a plan he wrote off a desk ended up crushing France in just 6 weeks. Manstein was one of Nazi Germany's most strategically gifted commanders, a general whose operational brilliance repeatedly altered the course of campaigns even when Germany's overall position was deteriorating. During the 1940 invasion of France, Manstein authored the bold concept, redirecting the main armored thrust through the Ardennes instead of Belgium, a maneuver that split Allied forces and led to France's rapid collapse. Promoted to field command, he later led the 11th Army in the Soviet Union, executing the Crimean Campaign and capturing Sevastopol after a prolonged and methodical siege supported by massive Gustav railway gun and air power. On the Eastern Front, Manstein became known for elastic defense and devastating counterattacks. After the catastrophe at Stalingrad, he stabilized the southern sector and launched the 1943 counterstrike that recaptured Kharkov, exploiting overextended Soviet formations with speed and concentration of force. Tasked with relieving the encircled 6th Army at Stalingrad, his operational proposals were constrained by political interference, contributing to Germany's decisive defeat. After repeated disagreements with Hitler, he was dismissed in 1944. After the war, Manstein was convicted of war crimes and sentenced to 18 years in prison. Ivan Konev. Ivan Konev began his military career as a conscript in the Imperial Russian Army during World War I before joining the Red Army in the Russian Civil War. Throughout the interwar years, he rose steadily through command positions, developing experience in large unit leadership while navigating the political pressures that defined Soviet military life. Unlike some officers eliminated during the purges, Konev survived and entered World War II as a senior commander prepared for large-scale operations. When Germany invaded in 1941, Konev initially commanded forces that suffered severe setbacks, including major encirclements. However, he avoided dismissal and was reassigned, later playing a key role in stabilizing sectors of the front. During the Battle of Kursk in 1943, commanding the Steppe Front, he directed reserves that counterattacked once German offensive momentum stalled. Konev's operational effectiveness became especially visible in 1944 during the Korsun-Shevchenkovsky offensive, where coordinated Soviet forces encircled German formations in Ukraine. He emphasized maneuvering around flanks rather than direct assault into fortified positions. In 1945, Konev commanded the First Ukrainian Front during the Vistula-Oder offensive, advancing rapidly across Poland into Germany. His forces participated in the final battles for Berlin, advancing from the south while coordinating movements with Zhukov's forces from the east. By war's end, Konev had helped oversee deep, sustained offensives that demonstrated the Red Army's transformation into a highly mobile and coordinated force. Erwin Rommel. Erwin Rommel began his military career long before World War II, earning distinction as a young officer in World War I, where he demonstrated aggressive small unit tactics and received high decorations for battlefield leadership. Unlike many senior German commanders, Rommel was not a product of the traditional Prussian general staff elite. His proximity to Hitler during the 1930s accelerated his rise once Germany rearmed. In 1940, Rommel commanded the 7th Panzer Division during the invasion of France. His unit advanced so rapidly through the Ardennes and into northern France that it earned the nickname Ghost Division, often moving faster than higher command could track. Rommel emphasized speed, surprise, and constant forward pressure, bypassing resistance rather than becoming fixed in prolonged engagements. In 1941, he was sent to North Africa to stabilize collapsing Axis positions where he gained a nickname, Desert Fox. There, commanding the Africa Corps, he relied on maneuver warfare in open desert terrain, using deception and aggressive flanking attacks. However, logistical strain and Allied superiority culminated in defeat at El Alamein in 1942. His views conflicted with other commanders. After being implicated in the 1944 anti-Hitler plot, he was forced to commit suicide, officially reported as dying from wounds, closing the career of Germany's most internationally recognized field commander. Walter Model. Walter Model built his reputation not as a glamorous offensive commander, but as Germany's emergency specialist, the general sent to collapsing sectors when the front needed to be stitched together immediately. Before World War II, Model served in World War I and remained in the Reichswehr during the interwar years, gaining experience in staff roles and operational planning. Unlike many aristocratic officers, he came from a middle-class background and aligned himself early with the Nazi regime, which helped his rise once war began. In Poland and France, Model commanded armored formations that participated in fast-moving encirclement battles, but his defining role emerged on the Eastern Front. During Operation Barbarossa, he commanded the 3rd Panzer Division and later the 9th Army, playing a key part in the encirclement battles around Kiev and in the brutal fighting near Rzhev. There, Model developed a reputation for defensive resilience, using layered fortifications, flexible reserves, and rapid counterattacks to blunt repeated Soviet offensives. By 1944, as Germany's situation deteriorated, Model was promoted to Field Marshal and tasked with defending critical sectors in both East and West. He helped contain the Allied advance during Operation Market Garden and later commanded forces during the Ardennes offensive. However, overwhelming Allied pressure and resource shortages limited his effectiveness. Encircled in the Ruhr in 1945, Model dissolved his army group rather than surrender formally and took his own life, ending the career of Hitler's most relied-upon defensive commander. Aleksandr Vasilevsky. Aleksandr Vasilevsky was one of the Soviet Union's most important strategic planners, a commander whose influence often operated behind the front lines but shaped some of the war's largest operations. Before World War II, Vasilevsky served in the Imperial Russian Army during World War I and later joined the Red Army, rising through staff positions during the interwar period. By 1942, he had become Chief of the General Staff, placing him at the center of Soviet strategic decision-making. During the critical phase of the war, Vasilevsky played a central role in planning Operation Uranus, the encirclement that trapped the German 6th Army at Stalingrad. The operation required precise timing between multiple fronts, coordination of artillery preparation, armored thrusts, and exploitation phases aimed at weaker Axis flanks. His emphasis was not on symbolic defense of urban ruins, but on isolating and destroying operational groupings. Later, he helped coordinate the planning of Operation Bagration in 1944, which dismantled Army Group Center through deception, overwhelming force ratios, and synchronized breakthroughs across a vast front. In 1945, Vasilevsky directed Soviet operations against Japan and Manchuria. The campaign demonstrated rapid mechanized maneuver across difficult terrain, collapsing Japanese defenses in weeks. After the war, he remained a senior Soviet military leader, recognized as a principal architect of the Red Army's transformation into a highly coordinated offensive force. Ewald von Kleist. Ewald von Kleist was a German cavalry officer by background, who transitioned into mechanized command as warfare evolved. By the outbreak of World War II, von Kleist had become one of the senior commanders entrusted with leading large, fast-moving formations rather than static infantry armies. During the 1940 campaign in France, he commanded Panzer Group von Kleist, a massive armored formation central to the breakthrough through the Ardennes. His forces forced crossings over the Meuse, drove deep behind Allied lines, and contributed significantly to the encirclement that trapped British and French armies near the Channel. The success depended on concentrated armor, rapid exploitation, and coordination with close air support, the core elements of Germany's operational approach. In Operation Barbarossa, von Kleist led Panzer Group I and Army Group South, spearheading deep advances into Ukraine. His units played key roles in large encirclements, including the Kiev pocket, where hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were captured. As the war progressed and German resources declined, von Kleist transitioned increasingly into defensive operations, attempting to manage overstretched fronts against growing Soviet offensives. In 1945, as Germany collapsed, he was captured by Allied forces and died in Soviet captivity. George S. Patton was one of America's most aggressive and controversial field commanders, a general who believed speed and relentless pressure could break enemy resistance before it fully formed. A career officer with a deep interest in mechanized warfare, Patton helped develop U.S. armored doctrine before World War II, arguing that tanks were not infantry support tools, but instruments of rapid exploitation. His first major test came in North Africa in 1943, where he took command of the battered 2nd Corps after the defeat at Kasserine Pass. Patton imposed strict discipline, restored confidence, and restructured operations, transforming a shaken formation into an effective fighting force within weeks. During the Sicily campaign, Patton's 7th Army executed rapid advances marked by bold flanking maneuvers and intense rivalry with Montgomery's British forces. Though criticized for the infamous slapping incidents, Patton's battlefield energy remained undeniable. In case you don't know about those incidents, you can check it out in our other video. In 1944, he led the 3rd Army after the Normandy breakout, conducting one of the fastest sustained advances in modern warfare. During the Battle of the Bulge, Patton executed a remarkable operational pivot, turning his army northward in days to relieve Bastogne, demonstrating exceptional logistical planning and command flexibility. Known for blunt rhetoric and theatrical presence, Patton combined operational audacity with a clear understanding of momentum, making him one of the Allies' most feared and effective offensive commanders. Konstantin Rokossovsky emerged as one of the Soviet Union's most precise and reliable operational commanders, a general whose career before World War II was nearly destroyed by Stalin's purges. A veteran of the Russian Civil War, he was arrested in 1937, imprisoned, and brutally interrogated. Released in 1940 as the Red Army urgently needed experienced officers, Rokossovsky returned to service carrying both physical scars and a reputation for exceptional professionalism. When Germany invaded in 1941, Rokossovsky was thrust into defensive battles under catastrophic conditions. He distinguished himself during the defense of Moscow, organizing coherent resistance, stabilizing fractured lines, and coordinating counterattacks despite shortages of men and equipment. His leadership combined discipline with adaptability, critical traits in a Red Army still recovering from early disasters. At Stalingrad, commanding the Don Front, he played a key role in Operation Uranus, the encirclement strategy that targeted weaker Axis flanks rather than the city's devastated center. Rokossovsky's most celebrated achievement came in 1944 during Operation Bagration. He argued for 2 simultaneous breakthrough axes instead of 1, insisting that divided pressure would fracture German defenses beyond recovery. Stalin approved after a tense debate. The resulting offensive annihilated Army Group Center, showcasing Rokossovsky's mastery of coordination, timing, and exploitation. By the war's final phase, he commanded major advances into Eastern Europe and Germany. Heinz Guderian. Heinz Guderian entered World War II as the German Army's leading advocate of armored warfare, having spent the interwar years challenging conservative doctrine. Drawing from his World War I experience as a signals officer, he insisted that tanks required speed and constant radio communication to be decisive. His writings and training reforms helped shape the Panzer divisions, emphasizing combined arms coordination rather than treating armor as slow infantry support. With war underway, Guderian's concepts were tested immediately. In Poland, his formations demonstrated rapid penetration and deep operational disruption. The 1940 invasion of France delivered the clearest proof. Leading 19th Panzer Corps, he forced crossings at Sedan, drove through the Ardennes, and pushed relentlessly toward the Channel. His refusal to surrender momentum, often advancing beyond cautious orders, contributed directly to the encirclement of Allied armies and France's swift collapse. The strategy relied on shock, tempo, and paralysis of enemy command rather than gradual attrition. During Operation Barbarossa, Guderian's panzer groups executed massive encirclements at Minsk and Smolensk, destroying entire Soviet formations through deep thrusts and coordinated exploitation. His operational philosophy prioritized mobility, local superiority, and continuous pressure. As the advance slowed near Moscow, conflicts with Hitler escalated, particularly over rigid stand-fast directives that ignored battlefield realities. Dismissed in late 1941, Guderian was later recalled to rebuild armored forces and became chief of the general staff. By 1945, Germany's strategic collapse overshadowed doctrinal debates. He surrendered to U.S. forces, detained but never convicted. Georgy Zhukov. Georgy Zhukov was the Soviet Union's most dominant wartime commander who was basically so good that he was repeatedly deployed to the worst situations just to fix them. Zhukov rose through the Red Army by demonstrating exceptional skill in organization, discipline, and large-scale maneuver warfare. His first major demonstration came at Khalkhin Gol in 1939, where he orchestrated a deep encirclement of Japanese forces using concentrated armor, artillery, and air power, a rehearsal for the operational methods he would later apply against Germany. When Operation Barbarossa shattered Soviet defenses in 1941, Zhukov became the regime's crisis manager, helping coordinate the defense of Leningrad before being rushed to Moscow to stabilize the collapsing front. At Moscow, Zhukov supervised the construction of layered defensive belts, repositioned reserves from the Far East, and coordinated the winter counteroffensive that pushed German forces away from the capital. His command style emphasized overwhelming force concentration, strict control, and relentless tempo. He played a central role in planning Operation Uranus at Stalingrad, targeting vulnerable Axis flanks rather than the city itself. At Kursk, Zhukov backed a deliberate defensive strategy, absorbing Germany's final major offensive into dense minefields and anti-tank zones before launching massive counterblows. By 1945, he commanded the First Belarusian Front in the brutal assault on Berlin, delivering the symbolic and military collapse of Nazi Germany. Hasso von Manteuffel. Manteuffel came from a Prussian noble family and entered military service long before World War II, serving in World War I and remaining in the Reichswehr during the interwar period. Unlike older generals shaped entirely by static trench warfare, Manteuffel embraced mechanization early, transferring into armored forces as Germany expanded its panzer arm. In the 1940 campaign in France, Manteufel's unit participated in the rapid advance through the Ardennes, where coordination between armor and motorized infantry proved decisive. On the Eastern Front during Operation Barbarossa, he led armored formations in deep advances toward Moscow, applying mobile warfare principles that emphasize speed and disruption over prolonged engagement. In North Africa in 1943, he commanded units during the Tunisia campaign, conducting defensive operations and counterattacks aimed at slowing Allied momentum despite deteriorating supply conditions. At the Battle of Kursk, Manteuffel commanded elite panzer formations that achieved initial breakthroughs against heavily fortified Soviet defenses. Later, during the Ardennes offensive in 1944, he led the 5th Panzer Army and achieved some of the deepest German penetrations into Allied lines, using surprise and rapid maneuver before logistical shortages halted progress. In 1945, facing overwhelming Soviet advances on the Eastern Front, he conducted fighting withdrawals before surrendering to British forces. After the war, Manteuffel entered politics in West Germany, remaining active in defense discussions. Albert Kesselring. Kesselring began his military career not as a ground commander, but as an artillery officer in World War I before transitioning into aviation during the interwar years. After Germany was restricted by the Treaty of Versailles, he played a significant role in the quiet rebuilding of German air power, becoming one of the senior architects of the Luftwaffe's expansion. By the time World War II began, Kesselring was already a high-ranking air commander, overseeing air operations during the invasions of Poland and France and later during the Battle of Britain. His role evolved as the war expanded. In North Africa, he worked alongside Axis ground commanders, helping coordinate air support in a theater defined by mobility and supply limitations. However, Kesselring's most notable command came in Italy. Appointed commander of German forces in the Mediterranean, he transformed natural defensive terrain into layered fortification systems. The Gustav Line, anchored on mountainous ground and fortified positions like Monte Cassino, was designed to slow the Allied advance through depth rather than rigid static defense. He relied on elastic defense, counterattacks, and strategic withdrawals to prolong resistance, forcing the Allies into costly incremental gains. Even as Germany's position deteriorated in 1944 to 1945, Kesselring maintained organized defensive operations in northern Italy. He surrendered his forces shortly before Germany's overall capitulation. After the war, he was convicted of war crimes related to reprisals in Italy, later released, leaving behind a reputation for operational defensive skill intertwined with severe wartime actions. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower was Supreme Allied Commander with exceptional ability to coordinate vast coalitions, basically a guide to control ego-driven commanders like Patton to exterminate any conflicts from within. As a West Point graduate, he spent the interwar years in planning roles, working under figures like General Fox Connor, and later serving in the War Department. Though he never commanded troops in World War I combat, he developed expertise in logistics, planning, and large-scale coordination. When the United States entered the war, Eisenhower rose rapidly. Appointed Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, he oversaw Operation Torch in North Africa, coordinating American and British forces across complex political and military lines. His defining achievement was Operation Overlord in 1944. Eisenhower approved the Normandy invasion plan, managed the immense logistical buildup in Britain, and accepted full responsibility for the operation's outcome. The invasion required synchronization of naval bombardment, airborne drops, amphibious landings, and sustained supply flow across the Channel. Following the breakout from Normandy, he continued directing Allied advances into Western Europe, navigating strategic disagreements while ensuring consistent pressure on Germany. By May 1945, Eisenhower stood as the central architect of the Western Allied victory in Europe. Gerd von Rundstedt. Von Rundstedt was one of Germany's most senior and experienced officers. He fought in the First World War, remained in the Reichswehr during the restrictive interwar period, and became known for his competence in large unit command rather than ideological zeal. By the time World War II began, von Rundstedt was among the most respected senior commanders in the German army, valued for his ability to oversee broad operational theaters. In 1940, he commanded Army Group A during the invasion of France, supervising the massive armored thrust through the Ardennes. While field commanders like Guderian executed rapid breakthroughs, von Rundstedt coordinated the larger operational picture, ensuring multiple armies advanced in synchronization. The encirclement of Allied forces and the collapse of French resistance unfolded under his overall command structure. During Operation Barbarossa, he led Army Group South in the invasion of the Soviet Union, overseeing the encirclement at Kiev, where hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were captured. As Soviet resistance intensified and German supply lines stretched thin, von Rundstedt advocated operational withdrawals to preserve forces, often clashing with Hitler's rigid stand-fast orders. Reassigned to defend Western Europe, he played a central role in preparing defenses against the anticipated Allied invasion. Though he questioned Germany's strategic position after D-Day, he continued coordinating defensive operations until dismissal. Captured in 1945, he faced war crimes charges but was not tried due to age and health, ending a career defined by large-scale operational command. Omar Bradley. Bradley was a West Point graduate. He spent much of the interwar period teaching tactics and command principles, shaping junior officers while the American military remained relatively small. Unlike some of his more outspoken contemporaries, Bradley built a reputation for calm judgment, administrative competence, and an ability to manage large formations without theatrics. His major wartime role began in North Africa, where he served under Eisenhower and later assumed corps command during the Tunisia campaign. There he gained practical experience coordinating infantry, armor, and artillery under real combat conditions. During the Normandy invasion in 1944, Bradley commanded the U.S. First Army, overseeing American landings at Omaha and Utah beaches. After securing a foothold, he directed operations aimed at breaking through the dense bocage terrain of northern France. Operation Cobra, the breakout plan he supervised, relied on concentrated air bombardment followed by rapid armored exploitation, shattering German defensive cohesion. As Allied forces advanced, Bradley took command of the 12th Army Group, the largest American field command ever assembled. He coordinated multiple field armies during the push across France, the fighting along the German border, and the response to the Ardennes offensive. Known as the Soldier's General, Bradley emphasized steady pressure, logistical planning, and cohesion over personal showmanship. By war's end in 1945, he had overseen vast American advances into Germany, contributing to the coordinated collapse of Nazi resistance in the West. Vasily Chuikov. Vasily Chuikov built his reputation in the harshest possible conditions, urban annihilation. Before World War II, he served in the Russian Civil War and later as a military advisor in China during the conflict against Japan, where he observed large-scale operations and coalition warfare. These assignments exposed him to both mechanized conflict and the importance of morale under sustained pressure. By the time Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Chuikov was an experienced but not yet famous commander. His defining role came in 1942 when he was appointed commander of the 62nd Army during the Battle of Stalingrad. Facing relentless German assaults, Chuikov adopted tactics designed specifically for urban warfare. He ordered his forces to hold positions as close to German lines as possible, sometimes within meters. This method, later described as hugging the enemy, turned factories, apartment blocks, and rubble into fortified strongpoints. Instead of fluid maneuver, the strategy relied on attrition, localized counterattacks, and constant reinforcement across the Volga River under fire. Chuikov maintained strict discipline while encouraging small unit initiative within the chaos of street fighting. His army's endurance bought time for Soviet forces to prepare Operation Uranus, which encircled the German 6th Army. He survived the conflict as one of the most recognized commanders of Soviet defensive resilience. Alan Brooke. Alan Brooke was Britain's senior military strategist for most of World War II, though he rarely commanded troops directly in major field battles during the conflict. He fought in World War I and gained extensive artillery experience. By 1941, he became Chief of the Imperial General Staff, placing him at the center of British grand strategy and in constant consultation with Winston Churchill. Brooke's influence was less about leading assaults and more about shaping when and where they happened. During the early war years, when Britain stood largely alone, he resisted premature large-scale offensives in Western Europe, arguing that insufficient preparation would lead to disaster. Instead, he supported campaigns in North Africa and the Mediterranean, where Axis forces could be weakened before a direct confrontation in France. His strategic calculations balanced manpower, industrial output, and alliance coordination, particularly with the United States after 1941. Brooke played a key role in planning Operation Overlord, ensuring that the invasion of Normandy occurred only once logistics, landing craft, air superiority, and reserves were adequate. His steady opposition to risky ventures often clashed with Churchill's more ambitious impulses. While not known for dramatic battlefield maneuvers, his strategic discipline helped ensure that British forces were committed where they could succeed, rather than where optimism alone demanded action. Tomoyuki Yamashita. Tomoyuki Yamashita was one of Japan's most capable operational commanders, a general whose reputation was forged through rapid maneuver and psychological shock rather than sheer numerical strength. Before World War II, Yamashita served as a military attaché in Europe and was involved in strategic planning within the Imperial Japanese Army. He clashed with factions inside Japan's military leadership and was temporarily sidelined, but his professional competence kept him in high command circles. His defining campaign came in 1941 to 1942 during the invasion of Malaya and Singapore. Commanding the Japanese 25th Army, Yamashita led a force significantly smaller than the British and Commonwealth defenders. Instead of frontal attrition, he relied on speed, deception, and aggressive infiltration. Japanese units moved rapidly through jungle terrain that British planners believed impassable for large forces. Yamashita preferred light armor, bicycles for infantry mobility, and close air superiority to maintain relentless pressure. The rapid advance down the Malayan Peninsula culminated in the capture of Singapore, which he forced into surrender despite limited supplies and overstretched lines. Later assigned to defend the Philippines in 1944, Yamashita faced overwhelming American strength. There, he shifted to defensive strategy, using mountainous terrain and fortified positions to prolong resistance. Despite tactical resilience, defeat was inevitable. After Japan's surrender in 1945, Yamashita was tried and executed for war crimes under the doctrine of command responsibility, a ruling that reshaped international military law. Kurt Student. Kurt Student began his military career in World War I as a fighter pilot. gaining experience in aerial combat and later transitioning into organizational roles as Germany rebuilt its armed forces under strict limitations. During the interwar years, he became one of the key architects of Germany's airborne forces, developing doctrine, training systems, and operational concepts for parachute and glider troops. By the outbreak of World War II, Student was commanding the Fallschirmjäger, Germany's elite paratroopers, a force designed for surprise, rapid seizure of key objectives, and psychological shock. His airborne units first demonstrated their effectiveness during the 1940 campaign in the Low Countries, capturing strategic bridges and fortifications through sudden vertical assault. The most ambitious test came in 1941 with the invasion of Crete, Operation Mercury. Student coordinated large-scale airborne drops aimed at seizing airfields that would allow reinforcements to land. Although the operation ultimately succeeded in capturing the island, German casualties were severe. The battle revealed both the power and vulnerability of airborne operations when facing prepared defenses. After Crete, Hitler became reluctant to authorize further large-scale airborne invasions, limiting Student's ability to repeat such operations. He later commanded ground forces in defensive roles as the war situation deteriorated. By 1945, Student's forces were engaged in holding actions against advancing Allied armies. Captured at war's end, he was tried for war crimes related to actions in occupied territories, though his airborne innovations left a lasting imprint on military doctrine. Today we were talking about generals that actually knew what they were doing, so I'm sure you will like the one where we talk about those who didn't really know. You can check it out here. Also, don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot. Thanks.